Hello, my dear ones. Today I'm taking you along on my lovely autumn walk. And today I brought a topic for you that might open your eyes a bit, because there are sometimes misunderstandings about this whole thing with depression therapy and getting healthy. Today I've brought you a list of 10 possible misunderstandings about the topic of therapy. Welcome to Soul Tapping. Today, I want to talk about 10 things you might have misunderstood until now regarding the topic of depression. In my videos, I often talk about these typical pitfalls and misunderstandings that I've gathered from my personal experience, both as a former sufferer myself, and from the experiences of the people who come to me and share their stories. A certain image has emerged for me about how therapy works and how it doesn't work. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. Point number 1. On my list of therapeutic misunderstandings is, I will be cured in the clinic. Many people think this when they realize they are feeling bad, and when they notice they are feeling so bad that they gradually can't cope anymore, feeling like they can't manage their daily life. And they urgently need help now. Then it is exactly right to go to a clinic. But the biggest misunderstanding, I believe, is that people think, I'll go there for 6 weeks or so, and then I'll be healthy again afterward. And then I can return to my job and do everything as before. That's not the case. I've already made a video of my own on the topic of clinics. Should I go to a clinic or not? That was the question addressed there. And I already hinted at it there. The clinic is the beginning, not the end, of your depression. So, it's your therapy time, not your depression. So, the stay at the clinic is more or less there for you to get away, to stop your hamster wheel, and to give you the opportunity to leave everything behind, to be taken care of, and to not have to do anything. And, yes, well, in many clinics, it's the case that not necessarily deep work, in terms of therapy, is done. So people keep telling me that they are more or less, well, I don't want to say, stored away. For some, it feels like you're just spending time there until the medication takes effect. But there are also many wonderful offerings with a bang. Sports and whatnot. And group discussions and so on. But the thing is, the clinic is not a cleanup phase. You won't be able to leave your depression behind if you don't go through a cleanup phase. If you only take pills. That would be my second point. The second misunderstanding is, the pills will heal me. That's not the case. I've talked about this several times before. The function of antidepressants is to first stabilize you so that you somewhat feel like a normal person again and can even get into a state where therapy is possible. Because cleanup phases are very, very difficult when you're in a deep depression and not really able to work on yourself, because you're not capable of anything at the moment. That is the function of antidepressants. But if you only take pills without doing anything else or changing something else in your life, you are not healthy. So the clinic doesn't heal you, the pills don't heal you. And the third point that belongs to this, the third misunderstanding is, the therapist will heal me. This is also a misunderstanding because no one in the world can heal you except yourself. The function of a therapist or a coach, naturopath, doctor, or anyone else you go to is to accompany you. To tell you things so that you are better informed, to show you tips and tricks, to initiate thought processes, to accompany you in finally allowing your repressed feelings, to change your beliefs, and all that. The function of a therapist is not to heal you. And they will not do that. Or she. Yes, that is. For some people, I believe, it's a misunderstanding that they think the therapist will do it for them. Doctor, make me healthy. No, the doctor doesn't make you healthy. You make yourself healthy. That's your job. It's your responsibility to work on yourself. And the therapist is only there to show you how to do it and to accompany you with their expertise. Misunderstanding number 4. I will feel better immediately as soon as I start therapy. That probably won't be the case. Because when you start therapy, you first begin to actually look at things. At all the things you haven't looked at before. Because that's why you became ill in the first place, because you didn't look. And in therapy, you learn and are guided to look at things. That means you first look at all the mess that needs to be cleaned up. And it might be that a lot of old stuff gets triggered. Of course, it was already there before, but it wasn't visible because it was beneath the surface, in the subconscious. That means it's often the case, it doesn't have to be, but it's often the case that when you start therapy, you initially feel worse because it also takes a lot of energy. It takes an incredible amount of energy to let these things surface and to process them. Sometimes it's hard work. That's why you probably won't experience feeling better right at the start of your therapy. It takes time. It's a process you go through. And you can't bypass it. So, you can't just snap your fingers and then feel better. We always wish it could be that way. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. Okay, misconception number 5 is that getting healthy means talking about my suffering once a week. Yes and no. Yes, well, therapy often works in such a way that you go every week, over months, sometimes over years. And what often happens, at least according to what people have told me, I can only relay that, is that not much more happens than you going there repeatedly just to talk about how bad you feel. And then you go back home. That's something that won't make you healthy, but it's something that initially leads you right into your process on your therapeutic journey. That's also good, like that. It's a phase you can't skip. When you're just starting to think for the very first time about what's going on with you, how it all came to be, and what happened in your childhood, if you've never thought about it until now, then it's a very important phase to just talk a lot with the guidance of a therapist. And talk it out, making yourself aware of things and getting them properly sorted. Maybe with the help of the therapist. That's a very important part of therapy. But, in my experience, that alone won't necessarily lead you to healing only halfway there. That's something I've repeatedly noticed in myself. Or let's say, the people who come to me, they are not beginners. You don't go to a naturopath when you're starting therapy for the very first time. Instead, the people who come to me are exactly at that point. They've already done their regular talk therapy. They know a lot about themselves. They know exactly what their problem is. They often already know their beliefs and such. But they say, I'm not out of the crisis yet. Instead, I'm stuck like in a dead end. And that's exactly my experience, that it's not enough to just keep talking about your suffering, because you keep manifesting it over and over again. So this whole law of attraction thing, it always works. It doesn't just work when you think about watching The Secret and ordering a Porsche from the universe. That's not what it's about. It's a universal law of life that always applies. That means, once you're past the phase of talking freely about it, where it initially feels good, at some point it no longer feels good. You'll notice that. At some point, it no longer feels good to keep focusing your attention on the old mess and dwelling on it. And to keep saying, I'm feeling so bad, I'm feeling so bad, I'm feeling so bad. That keeps you trapped in depression. At some point, it's about that. Making a change in strategy. That's my experience. That at some point you start to say, okay, now, I'm focusing on the positive and on what I want to have. And on my future instead of my past. So after this initial phase of talking, there has to be something more. And that's just my experience. It helped me much more to go to the alternative practitioners and coaches who, let's say, don't come from a psychology degree, who don't come from science, but from life practice, who have themselves overcome a crisis. Or something like that. That's my experience, that at some point, it's needed to really move forward. Misunderstanding number 6. Once I understand my problem, then it's already solved. Yes and no. In some cases, it can be that the realization of where the thing came from and why you have the problem already brings you a lot of healing. But it's not necessarily so. If you realize, for instance, that you have too little self-love, or that you have the belief that you're not good enough, or that you're not allowed to make mistakes, or something like that, then it's not automatically gone. So, for many people, it's like this: they constantly get annoyed with themselves for repeatedly showing the same behavior patterns, even though they now understand that they didn't want to do that anymore because it made them sick. Don't get upset about it. It's not enough to just understand it. It remains a process where you learn and practice and practice and practice. Step by step. So I'm telling you this just so you don't fall into the trap of judging yourself for not being able to do something, even though you understood it. In many cases, that's just not enough, but it's an important step that you can't skip, and you should praise yourself and be happy that you've managed to become aware of what your problem is and understand how you can solve it. Therapist misunderstanding number 7. The main thing is to have a therapy spot, no matter with whom. That's not entirely true either. Of course, in today's times, you're really glad to get a therapy spot because they're just scarce. It's simply difficult, and you have to wait a long time. You have to call many lists and things like that. That's really not nice. But if you go to a therapist with whom the chemistry isn't right, then you can save yourself the trouble. Because that's what I did back then. I waited a long time for a therapy spot, then had an initial consultation, went along with it, and thought, well, okay, I'm just glad to have someone now. Then I started with it and realized by the 3rd session at the latest, no, this isn't for me at all. And then I had to start over, searching, and had to wait for months again until I got the next therapist. And I just want to warn you about that. Don't just take any therapist, but pay close attention to your gut feeling. Listen to your heart, see if you feel comfortable there, if you feel secure, if you have the feeling, not just that this person is somehow competent or something, but if the chemistry is right, the interpersonal chemistry, because that's what ultimately leads to healing. It's the therapist-client relationship. That's what brings a lot of healing. And this leads to point number 8. Misunderstanding number 8 is that the higher the qualification, the better the therapist. That's not the case. If you have someone who has studied and has a doctorate and who knows what to show for it, and has written so and so many books, then that's great because they have great knowledge. But if the personal chemistry isn't right, you can forget about it. So, that's also my experience. For example, that people who have a really, really high, great qualification didn't help me as much, but rather those alternative people who did it from their own experience. And where I felt they suited me. I searched for a long time there too. But also with many people where I only went once and never again. So just because they are alternative practitioners doesn't mean they are perfect. Rather, the interpersonal aspect, that's simply what makes it. That's the main reason for me whether someone can help you or not. Or whether you are willing to open up, whether you are willing to let yourself be helped. This also includes, for example, whether you go to a man or a woman. So that actually still belongs to this point. The main thing is to have a therapy spot, no matter with whom. It's simply my experience that women do better with female therapists and men do better with male therapists. Simply because it's really important that you feel completely understood by your therapist. And I, also, naturally, work with male clients, but it's less often. I suspect that on one hand, it's because men are often not yet ready to admit that they need help. And it's certainly also because they tend to go to male therapists. So that makes total sense to me. I would feel that with a male therapist, I would have a problem. Really opening up and sharing very personal things about myself. And as a therapist, I've often had the experience where I had a man sitting there and I had no idea what his problem was. I couldn't understand it. It's not always like that, but with some, it is. And then I think to myself, oh dear, maybe you would have been better off going to a man. So, be careful when choosing a therapist. Misunderstanding number 9 is that therapy is only successful when I'm 100% okay again. This is also a misunderstanding that you might want to think about for yourself. How do you determine how far you've come on your therapeutic journey? I often experience, for example, that clients, let's say, who come to me for follow-up sessions, tell me that they got triggered again. And then all my fear came up again. And, yes, I'm not that far along yet, and there's constantly and repeatedly fear. And yes, well, I just accepted it, embraced myself, tapped a little, and then it was okay again. But I'm not far along yet, and I always think, wow, that's great, you did everything right. So, many people have the misunderstanding that they think that they are only successful with their therapy when it no longer occurs, when no problems arise, when no feelings are triggered, and when none of that happens anymore, when everything always runs smoothly. But that's not true, because that won't happen. Life remains life. And things always happen, like getting into an argument or something. So if you, let's say, you have the issue with your partner, that you keep getting into arguments and then feel small and powerless like you used to. And you think to yourself, oh, damn, and I didn't want to behave like that anymore. Now I've made myself small again. And so, when you notice that, you've had a huge success because the whole thing happens in 2 steps. The first step is to notice, to recognize your patterns, and the second step is then to change them. You can't take the second step before the first. Yes, that means if you were in such a situation, you had an argument or some situation where you felt triggered, and your old feelings came up, if you noticed that, then pat yourself on the back, open a bottle of champagne. That's a reason to celebrate. You did it, you took the first step and then comes the second step. There's no other way, so be proud of yourself. During therapy, you can always ask yourself what there is to celebrate. And of course, you can also celebrate the beautiful moments when you can feel joy again, when you notice that you've made progress because you remain calm instead of losing your temper. Or things like that. When you realize that you've overcome your patterns, of course, that's also a huge success. And you can open the champagne for that. But also, consider your smaller successes because they are so important to keep you motivated to continue. And it's important that you see these successes and that you are truly proud of yourself for achieving something, namely taking the first step to observe yourself and recognize your patterns. And finally, the 10th point, the biggest misunderstanding that I encounter repeatedly. Depression is incurable. That's simply not true. Don't let anyone tell you that. On one hand, people are told this by therapists, by doctors, in clinics it's said, I hear it repeatedly, and I've talked about it often in videos, that some really say, you will have to live with this forever, you will never be able to work again, you will have to take medications like this and that forever, blah, 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 blah. No, that's not true. With doctors, my personal principle is always to believe the diagnosis, but not the prognosis. Believe what the doctor says based on his expertise, but don't believe him if he tries to tell you anything about your future, because he can't know that. And it's totally demotivating to be told that you will never be able to work again. Which therapists say things like that? That's a nocebo effect. Yes, so, it's like you're programming yourself. If you believe what he says, then you're programming yourself not to get out of it. And it's very important for your healing success that you believe it's possible to get out of it. I am, of course, very familiar with these moments because it's simply a very long journey. You don't get out of it quickly. That's just how it is when it's a real, full-blown depression. And I know those moments when the thought comes to you, I've already done so much, nothing has helped, I'll never get out of it. It's understandable to think that, but it's simply not true. It's simply not true. You can get out of it. I'm not the only one who has succeeded. There are many who have succeeded, and, among other things, that's why I've started making this section of my website about success strategies. Maybe you can take a look, where everyone can write down what helped them, so you get motivated, so you can always see, yes, there are people who were helped by this or that, and they got out of it. And that's very important for you to stay on track. So don't believe this misconception that depression is incurable. So, my dear ones, now you are welcome to like my video, subscribe to my channel, and take a look around my website, www.sceneklopfun.de, or even book an appointment with me if you want to have a tapping session. And now I wish you a wonderful day. Take care. Goodbye.